The same honest and persistent industry was throughout distinctive of the career of David Wilkie. The son of a Scotch minister, he gave early indications of an artistic turn. And though he was a negligent and inapt scholar, he was a subtlest drawer of faces and figures. A silent boy, he already displayed that quiet concentrated energy of character which distinguished him through life. He was always on the lookout for an opportunity to draw, and the walls of the manse, or the smooth sand by the riverside, were alike convenient for his purpose. Any sort of tool would serve him. Like Giotto, he found a pencil in a burned stick, a prepared canvas in any smooth stone, and the subject for a picture in every ragged mendicant he met. When he visited a house, he generally left his mark on the walls as an indication of his presence, sometimes to the disgust of cleanly housewives. In short, notwithstanding the aversion of his father, the minister, to the sinful profession of painting, Wilkie's strong propensity was not to be thwarted, and he became an artist, working his way manfully up the steep of difficulty. Though rejected on his first application as a candidate for admission to the Scottish Academy, at Edinburgh, on account of the rudeness and inaccuracy of his introductory specimens, he persevered in producing better, until he was admitted. But his progress was slow. He applied himself diligently to the drawing of the human figure, and held on with the determination to succeed, as if with a resolute confidence in the result. He displayed none of the eccentric humor and fitful application of many youths who conceive themselves geniuses, but kept up the routine of steady application to such an extent that he himself was afterwards accustomed to attribute his success to his dogged perseverance rather than to any higher innate power. The single element, he said, in all the progressive movements of my pencil was persevering industry. At Edinburgh he gained a few premiums, thought of turning his attention to portrait painting, with a view to its higher and more certain remuneration, but eventually went boldly into the line in which he earned his fame, and painted his Pitlochry Fair. What was bolder still, he determined to proceed to London, on account of its presenting so much wider a field for study and work. And the poor Scotch lad arrived in town, and painted his village politicians while living in a humble lodging on 18 shillings a week. Notwithstanding the success of this picture, and the commissions which followed it, Wilkie long continued poor. The prices which his works realized were not great, for he bestowed upon them so much time and labor, that his earnings continued comparatively small for many years. Every picture was carefully studied and elaborated beforehand. Nothing was struck off at a heat. Many occupied him for years, touching, retouching, and improving them until they finally passed out of his hands. As with Reynolds, his motto is work, work, work. And, like him, he expressed great dislike for talking artists. Talkers may sow, but the silent reap. Let us be doing something, was his oblique mode of rebuking the loquacious and admonishing the idle. He once related to his friend Constable that when he studied at the Scottish Academy, Graham, the master of it, was accustomed to say to the students, in the words of Reynolds, "If you have genius, industry will improve it. If you have none, industry will supply its place." So, said Wilkie, I was determined to be very industrious, for I knew I had no genius. He also told Constable that when Linnell and Burnet, his fellow students in London, were talking about art, he always contrived to get as close to them as he could to hear all they said, for, said he, they know a great deal, and I know very little. This was said with perfect sincerity, for Wilkie was habitually modest. One of the first things that he did with the sum of £30 which he obtained from Lord Mansfield for his village politicians, was to buy a present, of bonnets, shawls, and dresses, for his mother and sister at home, though but little able to afford it at the time. Wilkie's early poverty had trained him in habits of strict economy, which were, however, consistent with a noble liberality, as appears from sundry passages in the autobiography of Abraham Reinbach the engraver. William Eddy was another notable instance of unflagging industry and indomitable perseverance in art. His father was a gingerbread and spicemaker at York, and his mother, a woman of considerable force and originality of character, was the daughter of a ropemaker. The boy early displayed a love of drawing, covering walls, floors, and tables with specimens of his skill. His first crayon being a farthing's worth of chalk, and this giving place to a piece of coal or a bit of charred stick. His mother, knowing nothing of art, put the boy apprentice to a trade, that of a printer. But in his leisure hours he went on with the practice of drawing. And when his time was out he determined to follow his bent. He would be a painter and nothing else. Fortunately his uncle and elder brother were able and willing to help him on in his new career, and they provided him with the means of entering as pupil at the Royal Academy. We observe, from Leslie's autobiography, that Eddie was looked upon by his fellow students as a worthy but dull, plodding person, who would never distinguish himself. But he had in him the divine faculty of work, and diligently plodded his way upward to eminence in the highest walks of art. Many artists have had to encounter privations which have tried their courage and endurance to the utmost before they succeeded. What number may have sunk under them we can never know. Martin encountered difficulties in the course of his career such as perhaps fall to the lot of few. More than once he found himself on the verge of starvation while engaged on his first great picture. It is related of him that on one occasion he found himself reduced to his last shilling, a bright shilling, which he had kept because of its very brightness, but at length he found it necessary to exchange it for bread. He went to a baker's shop, bought a loaf, and was taking it away, when the baker snatched it from him, and tossed back the shilling to the starving painter. The bright shilling had failed him in his hour of need, it was a bad one. Returning to his lodgings, he rummaged his trunk for some remaining crust to satisfy his hunger. Upheld throughout by the victorious power of enthusiasm, he pursued his design with unsubdued energy. He had the courage to work on and to wait. And when, a few days after, he found an opportunity to exhibit his picture, he was from that time famous. Like many other great artists, his life proves that, in despite of outward circumstances, genius, aided by industry, will be its own protector, and that fame, though she comes late, will never ultimately refuse her favors to real merit. The most careful discipline and training after academic methods will fail in making an artist, unless he himself take an active part in the work. Like every highly cultivated man, he must be mainly self-educated. When Pugin, who was brought up in his father's office, had learned all that he could learn of architecture according to the usual formulas, he still found that he had learned but little, and that he must begin at the beginning, and pass through the discipline of labor. Young Pugin accordingly hired himself out as a common carpenter at Covent Garden Theatre, first working under the stage, then behind the flies, then upon the stage itself. He thus acquired a familiarity with work, and cultivated an architectural taste, to which the diversity of the mechanical employment about a large operatic establishment is peculiarly favorable. When the theatre closed for the season, he worked a sailing ship between London and some of the French ports, carrying on at the same time a profitable trade. At every opportunity he would land and make drawings of any old building, and especially of any ecclesiastical structure which fell in his way. Afterwards he would make special journeys to the continent for the same purpose, and returned home laden with drawings. Thus he plodded and labored on, making sure of the excellence and distinction which he eventually achieved.